All right. Hello and happy Star Wars Day. Today is May the 4th, so I feel it's very appropriate to welcome you to our webinar, He Blinded Me with Science Fiction, a Reader's Advisory. I'm Kathy Crum, and normally I'm the cataloging supervisor for the State Library here at KDLA, but today I'm putting on my sci-fi fan persona instead. I'm joined today by my esteemed colleague, Kim McDaniel, who's one of our reference librarians and trainers. She'll be chatting for us today, so if you have any issues with the computer presentation software or audio, please use the chat box at the right of your screen to let her know. Also, you can use the chat box for any questions or comments that you have. Okay, so today we're going to take a look at the characteristics and history of science fiction, as well as some of the types and categories. We'll explore some genre blending between science fiction and other genres, and also some resources for finding science fiction. And I'll apologize now for any mispronunciations that might occur. It's one thing to see the authors and the titles, but it's a very different thing to have to actually say them, even if you've read them for years. Okay, science fiction is also known as SF or sci-fi. When defining science fiction, one of the terms that comes up is speculative fiction. This term is often attributed to Robert Heinlein, who used it as another term for science fiction, which did not include any fantasy. In the 21st century, though, it's become an umbrella term for stories with supernatural, fantastical, or futuristic aspects. So this could include genres such as science fiction, fantasy, horror, and so on. Science fiction is often confused with or considered the same thing as fantasy, but there is a difference. Science fiction is what could happen or theoretically happen in our universe, while fantasy cannot exist in our universe as we know it because there's usually magic or something supernatural involved with fantasy. Science fiction explores the question of what if when it comes to science and technology. The what if might be, what if aliens attacked Earth? What if space travel were common? Or what if people could travel through time? Here are some of the most popular elements of science fiction. A setting in outer space, on another world, or in the past or future. Characters that include aliens, mutants, and robots. Futuristic technology or scientific principles such as ray guns, time travel, or faster-than-light travel or communication. Paranormal abilities such as mind control, telepathy, telekinesis, and teleportation. Dystopian or post-apocalyptic political or social systems, or settings in other universes or dimensions and travel between them. And some science fiction might actually include all these elements, which would be pretty wild. So why do so many people find science fiction appealing? In the 2013 edition of Genre Reflecting, Mara Heafy described science fiction as the literature of the future, of technology, science, and adventure, but also self-discovery. She also said that the best SF teaches, and not just lessons about science and circuitry. The best SF provides a worthwhile simulacrum for the challenges of real life. Reading stories of heroes and aliens can prepare us for times in our lives when we felt alienated or feel called upon to be heroic, however mundane the circumstance may be. Science fiction poses the question, what if, and gives the reader the opportunity to decide the answer for himself or herself. There's also a sense of otherness or weirdness in SF stories that is fascinating to many readers. It's outside the realm of everyday life, and that unexpectedness is really exciting. Science fiction is extremely popular in all sorts of media right now. There's the new resurgence in Star Trek and Star Wars movies and TV shows, and superheroes are all over the place and very cool. So for once in my life, I am very cool. I've been waiting for a long time. There's also a surge in young adult titles, which can appeal to adult readers, especially reluctant readers. Okay, now we're going to take a brief look at the history of science fiction, and we're going to start in the 19th century. Although there were forays into what could be considered science fiction earlier, Mary Shelley is considered by many to be the mother of science fiction, with her novel Frankenstein considered by most to be the first science fiction novel. Written in 1818, it deals with the concept of science gone wrong. Other 19th century authors we consider pioneers of science fiction were not known as science fiction writers at the time, such as Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Also, the Industrial Revolution, Darwin's theories of evolution, and breakthroughs in transportation, weaponry, and factory productions inspired a wealth of science fiction stories and novels. In the early 20th century, science fiction gained popularity through pulp magazines such as Amazing Stories and Astounding Science Fiction, which featured serial science fiction stories and short stories. These magazines focused on the mechanical and how machines would change the world. Technology was important, more so than characterization or plot. One name to be aware of is Hugo Gernsback, who started the first science fiction magazine, Amazing Stories, in 1926 and coined the term science fiction. The Science Fiction Award, the Hugo, is named for him. Okay, the pulp magazines are also where we got some of our most popular early science fiction series. Edgar Rice Burroughs published A Princess of Mars in 1912, which started his long-running novel series featuring John Carter of Mars. Also at this time, science fiction was popularized through comic strips and movie serializations, such as Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon. In the late 1930s, John W. Campbell became the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, which coincided with the beginning of the golden age of science fiction in the 1930s and 1940s. Many noteworthy authors came to prominence during this period, such as Isaac Asimov, Frederick Pohl, Robert A. Heinlein, Arthur C. Clarke, Ray Bradbury, and Stanislaw Lem. The focus was on the hard sciences and hard science fiction about scientific achievement and technology. In the 1950s and 60s, the interest in space exploration made its way into science fiction, and interest in alien contact developed. Monster stories appeared regularly in magazines at this time. Think Godzilla, King Kong, In the 1960s, there was also a shift from the hard sciences to soft sciences, and many novels dealt with psychology and sociology. The 1970s brought more female authors, such as Ursula Le Guin, Anne McCaffrey, and C.J. Cherryh. In the 1980s, Cyberpunk appeared, portraying the downside of technology. In the 1990s, several themes emerged in science fiction, such as environmental issues, nanotechnology, artificial intelligence, and bioengineering, with a focus on how these rapid changes in technology were altering our culture and our world. In the 2000s, steampunk became the new theme. All of these themes in science fiction have continued into the 21st century. Okay, there are generally two types of science fiction. You've got hard science fiction and soft science fiction, and you'll see one type or the other in all the categories that we're going to discuss in a little bit. So hard science fiction is based on real science or engineering, and will probably focus on one of the hard or natural sciences, such as chemistry, astronomy, and physics. If you remove the technology or science from the story and it doesn't make sense, then it's probably hard science fiction. It explores questions about how technologies affect society and the consequences of scientific advances. Hard science fiction focuses on ideas more than action and emphasizes scientific or technological details and scientific accuracy, even if those scientific details are later disproved. Character development takes a back seat to the science in hard science fiction. Space travel and exploration is a common subject for hard science fiction, and it's the basis for most of the novels on this list, such as Arthur C. Clarke's Rendezvous with Rama and Ben Bova's long-running Grand Tour of the Universe series. Kim Stanley Robinson's Antarctica focuses on a research station in Antarctica. Imagine that. But Stanley is best known for his Mars trilogy, which portrays colonization of Mars by people from Earth. Other examples are Larry Niven's Ringworld series, Greg Egan's Orthogonal series, and Alistair Reynolds' Poseidon's Children's Saga. And apparently, if your name is Greg, you will probably write some hard science fiction. There's also Greg Bear, who does some hard science fiction too, and I had to take it off the slide. There's too many Gregs. Too many Gregs. Okay. Soft science fiction has a few definitions, but none are actually very definitive. Essentially, it's the opposite of hard science fiction. It can also be based on the soft sciences or social sciences such as psychology, sociology, and anthropology. Another definition is that it is science fiction that is not scientifically accurate or just uses science as a subplot, as the plot device. It can be religious or cultural, and the storylines are character driven. If a science fiction novel is more concerned with characters and society as opposed to science and technology, then it's probably soft science fiction. Although usually known for hard science fiction, Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End and The Hammer of God might be considered soft science fiction because of their emphasis on the characters and not on the science. The same could be said for Stranger in a Strange Land and The Moon is a Harsh Mistress by Robert Heinlein. Frank Herbert's Dune Saga explores the religion, politics, and culture of the planet of Arrakis. Other examples of soft science fiction are Lois Lowry's The Giver and Maria Doria Russell's The Sparrow and Children of God. Okay, now we're going to move on to some categories, and as you can see, we've got a lot of them to cover, so let's get started. Are we alone in the universe has been a question that has long fascinated the human race. What do they look like and what do they want are questions posed by many science fiction authors. And we're going to take a look at a few categories for stories about aliens. First, we have novels of first contact, which depict humanity's first meeting with an alien race, which does not have to take place on Earth. Some novels about first contact are Walter Tevis's The Man Who Fell to Earth, which was actually adapted into a 1976 film featuring David Bowie. There's Stanislaw Lem's Solaris, which has had 3 film adaptations, with the last one in 2002 starring George Clooney. Carl Sagan's Contact was adapted into a film starring Jodie Foster. And lastly, there is C.J. Cherry's Foreigner series, and she's still publishing books in this series, so ongoing right there. Novels about alien invasions are about, well, alien invasions. These can be invasions of Earth or a human Earth colony, so the invasion does not have to take place on Earth. The invasion does not have to be violent, but it usually is. Also, with many stories concerning human colonization of other planets, the humans can be the invaders, such as in Ray Bradbury's The Martian Chronicles. H.G. Wells' work, The War of the Worlds, is probably one of the earliest examples of alien invasion in a novel. Other examples are Jack Finney's The Body Snatchers, also known as Invaders of the Body Snatchers, and Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. A couple of young adult titles are Orson Scott Card's Ender's Game and Rick Yancey's The Fifth Wave. There are also novels that just focus on aliens and alien worlds, not necessarily on first contact or invasions. So we have Ursula Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness, which is about the politics and culture of an alien race as seen by a man from Terra or Earth. China Miéville's Embassy Town is set in the far future on a planet that humans share with aliens, and it deals with diplomacy and conflict between the two cultures. And this was actually nominated for a Hugo Award for Best Novel. In Adrian Tchaikovsky's Children of Time, winner of the Arthur C. Clarke Award in 2015, refugees from a dying Earth travel to a world that's been terraformed for colonization by their ancestors. But somebody else got there first, and then there's a clash of civilizations. Okay, alternate histories are what-if situations. A single act by a person or a different outcome for an event can change the course of history, and sometimes these changes are brought about by aliens and time travelers. A great example of this is Philip K. Dick's Man in a High Castle, in which President Franklin Delano Roosevelt is assassinated, with this event leading to Germany and Japan winning World War II. And there's currently a TV series on Amazon. One of the most prominent authors of alternate history is Harry Turtledove. In his The Guns of the South, time travelers from the future alter the course of the Civil War. In his World War series, aliens invade in the middle of World War II. So it really changes how World War II ends. Other examples include Harry Harrison's Eden series, in which dinosaurs did not die out but continued to evolve. and his Stars and Stripes Forever concerning the British intervention in the American Civil War. A more recent title is Ben Winter's Underground Airlines, about an America where Abraham Lincoln was assassinated before his inauguration. The Civil War never happened, and slavery still exists in modern times. Okay, parallel worlds are worlds that can be very like our own or quite different, and characters can travel between and interact with that reality. In Charles Stross's Merchant Princess series, some humans are world walkers who can move between different realities. In Taylor Anderson's Destroyer Man series, a U.S. destroyer and a Japanese cruiser from 1942 enter a dimensional rift into another reality, and they're forced to become allies against the aliens that live in that dimension. Other examples of parallel worlds are the Entire and the Rose series by Kay Kenyon and Claudia Gray's Firebird series for young adults. Okay, cyberpunk, also known as techno science fiction, came to prominence in the 1980s. It focuses on the effects of technology on society and also highlights the dark side of technology. One of the key components of cyberpunk is computer expertise, with much of the action taking place on online and virtual reality or cyberspace. Cyberpunk can be bleak with a dark and gritty environment. The typical main character is an anti-hero, with the hacker as the usual choice. A definite must-read for cyberpunk is William Gibson's Neuromancer, which is credited with introducing the whole cyberpunk genre. Other authors identified with cyberpunk are Werner Vinge, Bruce Sterling, Pat Cadigan, Rudy Rucker, and Neil Stevenson. There's also Ernest Cline's Ready Player One, Richard K. Morgan's Altered Carbon, Dan Wells's Blue Screen, and Chuck Wendig's Zeros. Oops. Forgot to change my slide. Sorry about that, folks. For some young adult titles, you might check out James Dashner's Mortality Doctrine series, about a teenage hacker in virtual reality games. Dashner is best known for his Maze Runner series. Okay, science fiction isn't all doom and gloom and paranoia that the aliens are out to get you. So let's look at some of the lighter sides of science fiction. Humorous science fiction gives the author the opportunity to poke fun at themes and cliches of science fiction and to parody almost anything in popular culture. Absurd humor is a frequent element of humorous science fiction, and a prototypical example of that is Douglas Adams' The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series. It's from these books that you learn don't panic, and that a towel is the most useful thing you can have. He's also the author of the Dirk Gently Holistic Detective Agency series, which is a series on BBC America. Other comic novels include Larry Niven's Draco Tavern series, Harry Harrison's Stainless Steel Rat series, and Bill the Galactic Hero series, as well as Spider Robinson's Callahan series and works by A. Lee Martinez and Alan Dean Foster. Okay. Military science fiction is focused on the military and armed combat, with characters usually in some type of military service. Wars are fought in the future time or location, in outer space, or even on other planets. These wars might also be fought against aliens, computers, or other humans. Military sci-fi covers a variety of military themes, such as military strategy, technology, procedure, and rituals. Good usually prevails over evil in the end, but not always. There's lots of crossover between military science fiction and the space opera category, leading to the term military space opera. All right. Oh, Glenda has added a couple more humor titles. Red Shirts by Scalzi. I'm sure that has something to do with Star Trek, doesn't it? And Night of the Living Trekkies. Yes, you never want to have a red shirt on in Star Trek. Okay, military science fiction. Sorry, I digress just a second there. Starship Troopers, Robert Heinlein's story of Earth's war with the alien race named the Bugs, helped popularize military science fiction, as did Joe Haldeman's The Forever War, which chronicles the life of one soldier in a war that lasts 1,000 years. Other examples include David Drake's Hammer Slammer series and RCN series, David Weber's long-running Honor Harrington series, which is still being published today, and the Ender Saga by Orson Scott Card. There's also John Ringo's Legacy of the Aldonada, also known as the Pauline War series, Tanya Huff's Valor Confederation series and its new spin-off, the Peacekeeper series, and John Scalzi's Old Man's War series. Really good, several good examples of military science fiction. Oh, and David has said Armor by John Stakely. Oh, another good title. Okay, the creation of mechanical life brings a lot of new problems for humans. In the realms of science fiction, there are essentially three types of mechanical beings. You've got robots, androids, and cyborgs. Robots and androids are pretty similar depending on how different authors interpret them, but essentially robots are mechanical beings that carry out complex tasks. They can be human-shaped, but not always. I mean, think R2-D2, you know. Now, an android is a kind of robot that's made to act and think like humans, and it's sometimes referred to as an artificial person. And cyborgs are humans that have had body parts replaced with some sort of mechanical components, usually advanced computer equipment, which enhance their abilities. The $6 Million Man is an excellent example of a cyborg, and the TV show was actually based on the novel Cyborg by Martin Caidin. And a fourth related technological being is the computer. Computers are generally not human-shaped, and unless you count laptops, computers are not mobile, but they do have a pesky habit of trying to take over humanity. If you're going to suggest fiction about robots or androids, the place to start is Isaac Asimov, who introduced what has come to be known as the 3 laws of robotics, or just the 3 laws, which govern the behavior of robots in Asimov's novels and have been adopted by other writers, whether in seriousness or in parody. If you want a good explanation of the 3 laws of robotics, go to YouTube and search Sheldon is a Robot. And it will give you a nice little example from Big Bang Theory, which explains how Sheldon might be a robot, following Asimov's 3 laws of robotics. So, anyway, Philip K. Dick, his Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, addresses the issue of what it means to be human and was the inspiration for the movie Blade Runner. In Frederick Pohl's Man Plus, cyborgs are used as part of a project to colonize Mars. For fiction about computers gone wrong, a classic example is Arthur C. Clarke's 2001 Space Odyssey, where the sentient computer HAL 9000 starts killing crew members of a spaceship. In Daniel H. Wilson's Robopocalypse, an artificial intelligence determines that to save life on Earth, it must destroy humanity and turns all robots and everyday devices against all humans. In Deborah Drizza's Mila 2.0 series, 16-year-old Mila discovers that she's actually an android created in a lab and must go on the run from a mysterious group that wants her technology. And then in Defy the Stars by Claudia Gray, Noemi, a young soldier from the planet Genesis, discovers Abel, a mechanical being who has evolved past his original programming, and decides to use him in a plan to defend her planet from invasion by Earth. This one just came out in April, so it's a pretty new title, and Gray is probably best known for some of her recent Star Wars novels and other YA fiction. Okay. Whether they're called ESP, paranormal abilities, or psionics, psychic abilities of the mind are also staples of science fiction. You've got telepathy, the ability to read other people's thoughts, telekinesis, the ability to move objects with your mind, and teleportation, the ability to move between locations. These are some of the most popular psychic abilities, but there's also precognition or future sight and clairvoyance, in which a person gains information about a person, place, or thing through the powers of his or her mind. And here are just a few examples of psychic abilities in science fiction. In A.E. Van Vogt's Slan, evolved humans have the ability to read minds and are super intelligent. Alfred Bester's Demolished Man is a police procedural in a world where telepathy is common. Just imagine what that causes. In Madeleine L'Engle's A Wind in the Door, part of her time quartet, one of the characters, Meg, learns kithing, which is similar to telepathy and empathy, or reading emotions of other people. You've also got Stephen King's Firestarter, where the main character has pyrokinesis, or the ability to create and control fire with her mind. In The Hollow Man by Dan Simmons, the main character Jeremy is a telepath who's constantly hearing voices in his head, and he goes on a cross-country trip in search of peace from those voices. And although best known for her Dragon Riders Return series, Anne McCaffrey also created a universe of stories based on psychic abilities and their use in space travel in her Pegasus series and the Tower and the Hive series. And actually, that picture of the Rowan there is what got me into reading science fiction novels that weren't Star Trek and Star Wars. I just thought it was a cool picture. And the story was good too. Okay, also we've got in Connie Willis's Crosstalk. This is a pretty new title. The main character has a medical procedure to artificially enhance her empathy with her boyfriend, which instead gives her telepathy, and she starts hearing all kinds of voices in her head. It's described by novelists as a romantic comedy for the digital age. Okay, now we've got stories of biological and genetic engineering and the moral and ethical issues involved. Sometimes characters in these novels decide to play God, creating their own races and species, and essentially science runs amok. A great example of this is H.G. Wells' Island of Dr. Moreau, in which the title character experiments on the animals of his island, bringing them to a human-like intelligence. Michael Crichton's Jurassic Park falls into this category, since the book concerns cloned dinosaurs, and definitely some genetic engineering going on there. There's also Heinlein's novel Friday, which follows the adventures of an artificial human, Friday, who is engineered to be stronger, faster, and smarter than the average human. Cloning is another popular topic for biological science fiction. In Dan Wells' Extreme Makeover, a cosmetic company scientist accidentally creates a hand lotion that overwrites a person's DNA and turns them into a clone of someone else. Other examples of biological science fiction focus on plagues, such as Michael Crichton's Andromeda strain, in which an extraterrestrial organism is unwittingly released on Earth. Darwin's Radio and Darwin's Children by Greg Baird look at the question of evolution and humanity. And apparently they really like red and black for their color schemes on their books. All the genetic engineering is red and black, except for Darwin's Radio there. Okay, steampunk is science fiction set in the time of the steam engine. It's an alternative version of history in which futuristic technology is available in the past. Advanced technology and steam power coexist, with steam power being dominant. It's focused on technology that's very reminiscent of technology found in the works of Jules Verne and H.G. Wells. Think, the submarine and 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, or the time machine. Steampunk novels are typically set in Victorian or Edwardian times, but they can also be set in the American Wild West, such as in the TV show The Wild Wild West. Some examples of steampunk might be set in a post-apocalyptic world where steam power has become prominent again. Steampunk is full of adventure and risky experimentation, fantastical monsters, outrageous adventures, and lots of steam-powered gadgets. Retrofuturistic really describes the atmosphere of the steampunk novels. Okay. K.W. Jeter is credited with inventing the term steampunk to describe his works such as More Like Night, which is a sequel to H.G. Wells' Time Machine. The first use of steampunk in a title was probably Paul D. Filippo's The Steampunk Trilogy. Cherry Priest's Clockwork Century universe combines steampunk, pirates, and non-supernatural zombies in an alternate history. George Mann's Newberry and Hobbs Investigation is a detective series set in an alternate version of Victorian England. Other examples of steampunk include the League of Extraordinary Gentlemen graphic novel series by Alan Moore, Philip Reeve's Mortal Engine series, and Scott Westerfeld's Leviathan trilogy. Our next category is the space opera. These are adventures in space on a galactic scale, featuring vast empires, massive space battles, and lots of action and intrigue. Space opera, a parody of soap opera, is romantic and melodramatic, with little focus on the scientific theory and details. Good usually overcomes evil eventually. Unlikely friendships can arise, and there's usually a dash of love interest. The term space opera was coined in the 1940s to describe these types of stories and was originally a term of insult to describe what some thought were the overblown and overly melodramatic novels of the 1920s and 1930s. By the 1970s, though, this term simply came to mean a science fiction adventure story. The two most well-known examples of space opera are Star Wars and Star Trek. But here are some other examples. Here are a couple of series by female authors. You've got Lois McMaster Bujold's Vorkosigan series and C.J. Cherry's Company War series. Frank Herbert's Dune series is another good example, and following Herbert's death, his son Brian and Kevin J. Anderson continued the series, and Kevin J. Anderson is also known for his Saga of the Seven Sons series. James S.A. Corey's Expanse series has a TV adaptation on SciFi right now, and I've also got a couple of young adult titles. You've got Garth Nix's A Confusion of Princes and Rhoda Beletz's Empress of the Thousand Suns. All good examples of space opera. Hasn't there ever been an event or a decision that you wish you could change? The assassination of President Lincoln, the bombing of Pearl Harbor, buying your son or daughter that drum set for Christmas. Well, in science fiction about time travel, this could be a possibility, but it might come with some disastrous effects. There are a few fictional versions of time travel. The first is that there's a single fixed history, which is unchangeable. Anything that a time traveler does is part of history all along, so he or she can't change history. You might have heard of the butterfly effect, which is a phrase coined by a mathematician to describe chaos theory, where a small change can greatly impact the outcome of a situation. This is a favorite theme in time travel fiction, where history is flexible and subject to change, but there can be major repercussions, as even the smallest changes can cause extreme alterations to the timeline, as seen in Ray Bradbury's novel A Sound of Thunder, where a world was changed due to the killing of one small insect. In the last version of time travel, the time traveler travels to an alternate timeline, so his or her actions don't actually affect the original timeline. And for more information than you ever wanted to know about time travel, you can check out the article on time travel from Wikipedia. Here are a few popular time travel plot devices. You've got time slips, where some accident or unknown occurrence brings a person into the past or future. Time loop, where events happen over and over. Think Groundhog Day. And time paradoxes, where someone goes back in time and changes history, and by doing so causes a paradox. What the person went back into the past to change didn't occur, so he or she wouldn't need to go back to the past, since the reason for the time travel is removed. And now I think I'm getting a slight headache from thinking through that one. So let's go on to some time travel titles. As you might expect, there's a lot of examples of time travel in science fiction. You've got H.G. Wells' Time Machine, which popularized the idea of a time device, time travel vehicle. Several books by Connie Willis focus on historians who travel into the past to study history. You've also got Madeleine L'Engle's classic A Wrinkle in Time, which has a new movie adaptation coming out in 2018, I think. More examples are Cage Baker's Company series, which has time travel and cyborgs, and Michael Crichton's Timeline, where a group of students go back into the past to rescue their teacher who had gotten stuck there. And there's film adaptation of Timeline starring Paul Walker and Gerard Butler. There's also Bid Time Return, which by Richard Matheson, which uses hypnosis as a means of time travel, and was actually adapted into the film Somewhere in Time starring Jane Seymour and Christopher Reeve. In Eric Flint's 1632 universe, also known as Ring of Fire series, inhabitants of a town in West Virginia end up in Germany during the 30 Years' War. There's definitely a clash of culture that goes on there. There's also Stephen King's 11/22/63, which deals with a time traveler who tries to stop the assassination of John F. Kennedy. And there's a series based on this on Hulu. In Alain Mustay's All Our Wrongs Today, the main character Tom lives in a 2016 filled with flying cars and moon bases, and actually accidentally travels back in time to our 2016, which is a rude awakening for him. And no discussion about time travel in science fiction would be complete without a mention of Doctor Who. Okay. Now, utopian and dystopian fiction are popular categories for science fiction novels. In utopian fiction, the society or world is perfect, and in dystopian fiction, it's the exact opposite. And sometimes what seems to be utopian society actually has a dystopian element to it at its core, or it's under attack from some outside threat to its society and culture. Lots of classic science fiction is dystopian fiction, such as Fahrenheit 451, A Clockwork Orange, 1984, and A Brave New World. There's also Margaret Atwood's The Handmaid's Tale, which has a TV adaptation that just premiered on Hulu. Lois Lowry's The Giver is an example of what seems to be utopian society, but really is dystopian society. The trend of dystopian fiction is extremely prevalent in young adult fiction, as seen in Suzanne Collins' Hunger Games trilogy, Veronica Roth's Divergent trilogy, James Dashner's Maze Runner series, Ali Condi's Match trilogy, Scott Westerfeld's Uglies, and I could go on and on and on. Closely related to dystopian fiction is post-apocalyptic and apocalyptic fiction. Apocalyptic fiction is concerned with the end of civilization due to a natural or man-made disaster, such as nuclear warfare, alien invasion, or some type of pandemic. Post-apocalyptic fiction deals with the aftermath of that civilization-ending disaster. An early example of post-apocalyptic fiction is Mary Shelley's Last Man, published in 1826. This novel is set in a post-apocalyptic 2100 and deals with a lone man wandering and pondering the dead planet Earth. The aftermath of nuclear war is a popular topic, as seen in Neville Shute's On the Beach and Walter M. Miller's A Canticle for Leibowitz. Justin Cronin's Passage trilogy and Richard Matheson's classic I Am Legend are both set in worlds filled with vampire-like beings due to a worldwide plague. In Neal Stephenson's 70s, the moon disintegrates, causing disasters upon Earth. Humans attempt to leave Earth for safety in the space, and that's only just the beginning of the story. And in William R. Forson's John Matheson series, an EMP or electromagnetic pulse disables all electronic devices such as cell phones, computers, airplanes, and refrigerators, which plunges society back into the Dark Ages. Okay, we're going to talk a little bit about expanded universes, which is a term used for novels based on characters from a franchise in another medium such as television, movies, and games. Expanded universe stories are usually new adventures based on existing characters, which is different than novelizations of a movie or television episode. These are considered further adventures and are not usually considered part of the canon or official storyline. Star Trek and Star Wars are probably the most popular subjects for these expanded universe novels. And Star Wars is, an interesting case. As many of you know, there have been a ton of Star Wars novels published over the years, especially since the 1991 publication of The Heir to the Empire, which started the whole major Star Wars book craze. Now, after Disney acquired Lucasfilm, though things started to change, the original Star Wars Expanded Universe is now deemed non-canon in April 2014, and it was rebranded the Star Wars Legends. So anything published up to April 2014 is considered part of that Legends universe. If you purchase any of those books now, they're going to have a Legends logo at the top of the book. Anything published after April 2014 is considered part of the new official canon or storyline. Some cool stuff there. Another television franchise that's a popular subject for novels is Doctor Who. The early Doctor Who books were actually novelizations of television episodes, but following the restart of the series in 2005, new novels and audiobooks are of the expanded universe type. Video games are also popular subjects, with examples such as Halo and Mass Effect. Okay, we're going to look at a little bit of genre blending, and we're going to start with sci-fi horror, which is a blending of science fiction and horror fiction with elements of both genres. These stories usually have monsters or aliens. There can be cases of genetic engineering gone wrong. Some may believe these are science fiction. Some may believe these are horror, but they are definitely a little bit of both. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein would fall into this category, as well as classics The Day of the Triffids by John Wyndham and The Body Snatchers by Jack Finney. Some more recent examples are Greg Bear's Hull 03, Daryl Gregory's Pandemonium, Infected by Scott Sickler, and Jeffrey Thomas's Punktown novels. Next, we have some sci-fi mysteries and thrillers, which are mystery and suspense stories with a science fiction aspect. And some classics are Isaac Asimov's The Caves of Steel and Alfred Bester's The Stars My Destination and The Demolished Man. The Automatic Detective by A. Lee Martinez is a humorous science fiction parody of the hard-boiled detective novel. More examples are Kristen Catherine Rush's police drama, The Retrieval Artist series, and Ben H. Winter's The Last Policeman trilogy. Gene Wolfe's The Borrowed Man is about clones that are kept in public libraries and are checked out when needed. The Borrowed Man of the title is a clone of a mystery writer who's borrowed to help solve a mystery concerning one of his books. You've got The Big Sheep by Robert Coes, which follows the adventures of Private Eye Erasmus Keene as he and his partner search for missing genetically altered sheep in 2039 Los Angeles. And Dark Matter by Blake Crouch is the story of what might have been for a college professor who's thrust into an alternate version of his life and must search to find his way back. Crouch is also the author of the Wayward Pines trilogy. Okay. Science fantasy is a blend of science fiction and fantasy. It has many of the traits of fantasy, but there's no magic, and there's usually some quasi-scientific explanation for what goes on. And a classic example of this is Edgar Rice Burroughs' Barsoom series, which features John Carter of Mars. This is reminiscent of the swords and sorcery fantasy novels, but it's set on Mars, so that's the science fiction aspect. Now, this could be controversial to some, but I have put Anne McCaffrey's Dragon Riders of Pern series in this category instead of with fantasy. Yes, I know there are dragons involved, but those dragons were genetically engineered by colonists from Earth, so I do think it qualifies as science fantasy. Other examples of science fantasy can include Marion Zimmer Bradley's Darkover series, Robert Silverberg's Madripoor series, and Marissa Meyer's young adult series, The Lunar Chronicles, which are science fiction retellings of fairy tales. And I thought that was really good series. My husband even enjoyed it. Okay, there are lots of examples of science fiction novels that have been adapted for the screen. I mean, Jules Verne's 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea and Journey to the Center of the Earth, as well as H.G. Wells' War of the World, The Time Machine, and The Legend of Dr. Moreau have all had film versions, and sometimes several film versions. Then there's the recent blockbuster adaptations of The Hunger Games and the Divergent series. Now, here are some films that you might not realize or have forgotten that originally started out as novels or short stories. There's Logan's Run, which is based on a novel by William F. Nolan and George Clayton Johnson, which also spawned a short-lived TV series. Somewhere in Time, Starship Troopers, and The Postman. Bicentennial Man is loosely based on two short stories by Isaac Asimov, Bicentennial Man and The Positronic Man. Now, I Am Legend with Will Smith was based on the novel I Am Legend by Richard Matheson, but it was also the inspiration for the films The Last Man on Earth and The Omega Man. And there's also the recent movie The Martian, which was based on the book by Andy Weir. Now, if there is one science fiction author who has affected science fiction film more than any, it's probably Philip K. Dick, whose short stories and novels are popular inspirations for several well-known short science fiction films. Blade Runner, as I mentioned before, was based on the novel Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And there's the sequel for Blade Runner that's scheduled to come out later this year, which features characters from the original novel and the movie. Total Recall was based on the short story We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. and Adjustment Bureau on the short story adjustment team. The films Minority Report with Tom Cruise, Imposter with Gary Sinise and Madeline Stowe, and Paycheck with Ben Affleck are also based on the works of Philip K. Dick. And as I mentioned before, there's also The Man in the High Castle, the television show. Okay, so now we're going to move on to some, we finished with our types and categories, so let's look at just some resources. And we're going to start with some online resources. Both Amazon and Barnes & Noble have a genre list that you can look at. And actually, Barnes & Noble has a really cool tagging system. If you search for a title, they usually have like some tags at the end that you can click on to get more titles, similar titles. So that's a really neat, I use that a lot when trying to figure out what things were. Fantastic fiction, Locus, and Worlds Without End are also really good sources for science fiction titles. For more online resources, there's the Science Fiction Encyclopedia. This was originally a print title that's now offered freely on the web. If you're trying to figure out what something actually means, what a term is when it has to do with science fiction, or find out about some of the authors, this is a really good source for that. I've also included an article on tips for finding good science fiction with a discussion on what good means, since that's different for everyone. Okay, another good place to look are the major award winners for science fiction. The Hugo and the Nebula Awards are for both science fiction and fantasy, but for strictly science fiction, you can check out the British Science Fiction Awards, the Arthur C. Clarke Award, and the Philip K. Dick Award. If you want even more titles and authors, I recommend you check out Novelist, which is part of the KYVL databases. On the home page, they have a section on recommended reading lists, which are broken down by ages. This is an example of a fantasy and science fiction reading list for teens, and it's a really great way to find some of the newer books being published in these genres. There's also Goodreads, which I'm sure you're familiar with, and you can browse Goodreads by genre, and science fiction is one of the genres that you can browse. And as you can see, that Goodreads offers a lot of subgenres under science fiction, so it's yet another good place to find titles. If you're looking for young adult or teen titles, here are some suggested sites provided by our youth services consultant, Krista King Oaks. The Teen Library and Toolbox, Voya Magazine, which has some book lists, and the Young Adult Library Services Association, or YALSA, which has a top teen list. These lists are a mix of genres, so you'll need to do some searching on the titles to see what they actually are. They're usually fantasy heavy, so just be aware of that. YALSA also has a new book finder feature, which allows you to browse by award winners, authors, etc. So that's a good one. And here are a couple of articles that Chris has suggested. Where to start with young adult science fiction, which is a good starting place for classic or canonical titles for teens. There's also a good article on diversity in science fiction and fantasy for teens. So, some good resources from Krista. Now, this site includes some resources that I found helpful while working on this webinar. These three are available from the State Library's collection if you'd like to borrow them through ILL. The audiobook From Here to Infinity is part of the Modern Scholar series and includes lectures on the history of science fiction and also an overview of science fiction authors and trends. The last resource, Genre Reflecting, is up to about, I think, 7 editions now, and the older editions would be great resources for older titles. And I will also freely admit that Wikipedia and Novelist were very helpful for this webinar. Okay. Now, we've got quite a few book discussion kits based on science fiction novels here at KDLA, with many of those being Text Express Youth Kits. Here are some of the titles that we have. Hopefully you'll recognize several of the titles from this morning's webinar, but we have many more Text Express that are science fiction novels. So feel free to check those out. We also have some large print and regular print book discussion kits for science fiction titles. We've got some classics, Fahrenheit 451 in large print, and 1984, A Brave New World, and I Am Legend in regular print. For more information about KDLA book discussion kits, you can check out this link to our book kits page. and save the date. I'll be doing a companion to this webinar, Flight into Fantasy, a reader's advisory for fantasy fiction, on May 23rd. You can register on our continuing education calendar. And we have come to the end of our webinar. So we have time for discussion and questions if you have any. We'll also be putting up a pod so that we can you can download the slides, and I also have a handout which has even more titles than the ones that are on the slides. So any questions? Thank you, Glenda. All right. Hold on one moment. And we'll have our pod up here. All right, here is our file pod. If you click on the title, there is the slides and then also the SciFi handout. If you click on that and click download, then you can download the files to your computer. So any other questions? I thank you guys. You've been a good audience. I just want to say before anybody leaves that May the 4th be with you. And I just hope you enjoyed yourself. It is difficult to find good SF anymore because good is really, you know, that depends on who you are, what you enjoy and what your patrons enjoy, what they might consider good SF. So it is difficult to find because it seems like everybody's writing it. So it's out there, though. It's out there. All right. Well, I'm glad everyone enjoyed it. It is a rainy day here in Frankfurt, but hopefully this made it a little better. All right. Oh, yes, raining everywhere. We need the rain, though. I like seeing the sun.
Me too.
Okay, everyone. I will, Kim and I will hang out here if anyone has any questions. If not, as I said, may the 4th be with you and enjoy the Star Wars Day. Thank y'all.